She's an event tactician, using her playbook to land Indiana on the biggest stages in all of sport.
It had been a dream building for years to make our state capital a sports capital of the country. And with Super Bowl 46 in Indianapolis in 2012, we were center stage.
Super Bowl, check. NBA All-Star Game, check.
I think we'll be the center of the basketball world, starting with the NBA All-Star Game in February.
I think Indiana already is, but it's the heartland in terms of basketball, and nobody embodies it more than Larry Bird himself. So,
this is going to be special. We know how full a party the NBA has been around. We haven't had it since '85, and we look forward to getting back in the mix and having the All-Star Game not only for our fans but for our state.
That was Hoosier basketball legend Larry Bird after he drove an Indy car down the streets of the Big Apple to deliver Indy's bid to host the NBA All-Star Game, a proposal that had Mel Raines' talents stamped all over it. She's Indiana's point guard for scoring the biggest events in sports, growing up in South Bend, her career in politics, how she got into sports, and what drives her to keep Indiana in the spotlight. Mel Raines, my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Deck. Mel Raines has had a passion for sports since her days at Mishawaka Marian High School. Never met one she didn't like. Soccer, tennis, basketball. Perhaps it was her destiny to wind up becoming a key driver to bring big sporting events to Indianapolis. Mel's resume also includes a few years in the White House and the past few years overseeing another house, the massive renovation of Gainbridge Fieldhouse. And I am really pleased to be joined on the podcast this week by Mel Raines, the President and Chief Operating Officer of Pacers Sports and Entertainment. And Mel, many of the guests on this podcast are extremely busy people. I don't think anyone can be more busy than you typically are, and certainly you've been recently. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me on, Gary. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I want to talk about what you just wrapped up with this dramatic makeover of Gainbridge Fieldhouse. I'm talking about being busy. You literally just stepped out of the meeting with the NBA, right? The NBA's in town. Massive planning effort underway for All-Star Weekend next year.
Yeah, we've got a huge group here, actually several different groups here from the NBA this weekend. It's exciting there, and it couldn't be a nicer day. I told them it'll be just like this in February, I'm sure. We've got groups from their community engagement, so looking at some of their legacy and community events that will take place over that weekend, and then also their corporate sponsors. And so that's one of the big things why we do these are the economic impact. And so we presented this morning Rick Fuson did to about, I think, 80 corporate sponsors that are in town for the first time. And interestingly, many of them have been here before for other events, but the first time for this All-Star planning session. And they're out looking at venues and locations all over town, and Lucas Oil Stadium and Gainbridge Fieldhouse and Bicentennial Unity Plaza. So it's exciting to see people here, and they're excited to get their planning going.
So the corporate presence, these are representatives from the corporate world who will be part of the All-Star Weekend, coming in to kind of scope out places to do parties and those types of things.
Yeah, they're activations with fans, and it's the biggest sponsors of the NBA. So everyone from Pepsi and Tissot, who does the shot clocks, to Google's here, and a lot of the other big companies. And this is a great opportunity for them to meet the biggest and best fans of basketball in the world who come into town for this. So we've been to probably 8 of the NBA All-Star games over the last few years. And some of the more fun activations are what these creative companies come up with to interact with the fans in town.
And there's so much impact that comes out of this event. I guess if you think about it, exposing Indianapolis to these corporate executives is a good thing. They get to see Indianapolis and see the city and the state and, walk away, hopefully with a good impression, right?
Absolutely. Chris Gall was there with us from Visit Indy this morning. He opened the session with Rick and talked about how we've been rated the #1 convention city in the country. And they do this kind of thing all the time, all over the world, really. And so having those kinds of decision makers checking out our city and looking at it for the first time, maybe in a different way, is a great thing. So we've got the perfect combination of people coming here to do business, and then our businesses and the people who have contributed to the host committee being able to host people to come in to see how we do a weekend like this. And so there's a really big business presence at this.
Can you put in perspective for people the planning process, how significant it is, how all-encompassing it is, what a big task it is? But put it in perspective for folks who may, they see the finished product, they see the All-Star weekend, but they have no idea what has gone on and what will go on between now and next February.
The details can be a little bit overwhelming, to be honest. I've never worked on an event that this started in 2017 with Larry Bird driving the IndyCar down Fifth Avenue in New York to deliver the bid. And then obviously the event being pushed from 21 to 24. So we've had a board of directors. We found a nonprofit 501c6 host committee. We have a board of directors of a little over 50 people of our community leaders that have been helping us guide this since 2018. And then we have 24 planning committees. That's coincidental, not because of 2024, but 24 planning committees with over 400 community volunteers helping lead everything from sustainability to transportation and parking, host committee events, how we're going to dress up downtown Indy. It's really incredible. And this is the model we've used. I inherited when I came to work on the Super Bowl, but certainly had been used for many events before, March Madness and college football. That was so successful in 22. And so we're certainly stealing a playbook that works well and then customizing it for this particular event. And then the Pacer Sports Entertainment is certainly incredibly involved. We have most of our employees playing a role in some way, many of them on these committees, and then others who will be volunteers that weekend.
You are just coming off a massive effort, a makeover, literally the second largest makeover in NBA history, only behind Madison Square Garden, of Gainbridge Fieldhouse, inside and outside the Fieldhouse. You, an all-female team, right? 3 female executives with Pacer Sports and Entertainment led this effort. I've been there. I've seen it. The reaction I've got from other people, all the same. It's been pretty incredible. Talk about that experience, because again, in terms of all-encompassing, probably overwhelming many times, how big an effort that was.
It was a really big effort and took a long time. I mean, I think people have come back into the building and some people may have thought we used COVID and some of the shutdowns to think about doing that and to do it. And the reality is we started master planning that in 2016, worked on the plans in 2017 and 2018, worked with the CIB and Melina Kennedy and Mayor Hogshead and their team, throughout 2018. And then in early 2019, signed the 25-year lease extension that Herb Simon and the Simon family very much wanted to ensure the team would stay here for, 25 more years and hopefully forever. I think that's everyone's intent. And then the planning, the construction documents took all of 2019. The bids went out that fall and work was scheduled to always begin in March of 2020. But I had never managed a construction project of this. I had managed a kitchen renovation that was about $30,000 once, and now I've got about $400 million under my belt. So looking back at the number of years we put into it, really, like most things, if you put the time in on the front end, then it executes a little bit better. But the bumps that COVID caused and supply chain issues and other things we never could have anticipated, I'm incredibly proud of our team here who worked with the construction folks on a daily basis to close this building and reopen it 3 times, which is not easy to do. And then the team from Shiel Sexton, who led the construction management, Mike Diltz and Matt Barnes and Tony Eisenhut, who lived in this building for, a long, long time and just through force of will got this thing done. It was just an incredible amount of work to do in such short spurts. And all of our subcontractors and partners and Populous, our architects, like that kind of team effort was just something I rarely am a part of at that scale, and was just, we lost a lot of sleep. I got a lot more gray hair, but it's nice to hear that your review of it and a lot of the fans and guests that have been back really love it. And we take such pride in this building. It's the best building in the NBA to watch a basketball game. It's the best building in the world to watch a basketball game. And tonight we'll have Dave Chappelle, and we've got the Eagles coming and Aerosmith and all these other amazing things that are really important for our city. It's important for us to be able to have that to attract and retain businesses and talent and young people, and people want to stay and live here when we have this vibrant city with all these things going on.
Your goal, I know, was to make this a state-of-the-art arena, brand new in many respects, but yet not lose that historic feel that the Fieldhouse certainly has had all those years. That's probably a pretty tough thing to do. I mean, it probably would have been a lot easier to just get the inside and redo it and go from there. How challenging was it to really strike that balance?
It was pretty challenging because it's easier. It would have been easier, to your point, to rip it all out and make it look brand new. But that's never what we wanted to do. We always wanted to keep the soul of the Fieldhouse, that spirit that everybody loved. And we spent a lot of time at Wrigley. Wrigley had done a big renovation just as we were starting, and they managed to thread that needle well. Fenway I've been to, they've threaded that needle well. And so when we would look at things, it was really the small details that made a difference. When you looked at what the architects would propose, sometimes it just didn't feel right. It didn't look like our building. It didn't look like the direction we wanted to go. Sometimes it was as simple as adding brick to a concourse or an area that made it, keep that. They certainly didn't propose a lot of things we didn't like, but there were some things where we decided to keep the existing structure. The ceilings on the main concourse, for instance, we kept these sort of metal clouds there, but we added some LED lighting to the edges. And now when you come in on a Pacers game, they're blue, and at a Fever game, they're red. And if you're doing an event here and your company color is purple, we can do that too. It's the exact same thing we had before with a little bit of lighting. And so, take that times 1,000 details. And that's what we tried to do. But I certainly lost a lot of sleep the night before we opened the doors for the first time after phase 1, and people walked in, and I thought, I hope they like what we did, because it's hard to go back now.
Yeah.
Where, the cake is pretty well baked and we've got to keep going.
Yeah. The other element that I think is very important and really special about it is Bicentennial Unity Plaza, which is outside Gainbridge Fieldhouse, basketball court that can be transported and will be transitioned into a skating rink bigger than the one in Rockefeller Center in New York City. Talk about the plaza as it connects to the rest of downtown, because I know that's another real focus of really wanting to be part of another renaissance, if you will, of downtown Indianapolis, especially the Near East Side.
Absolutely. One of the biggest ideas that came out of that master planning process was extending our campus a little bit. And just based on where we sit, we can't do that to the south because CSX is running trains there all day, and Pennsylvania and Delaware are to the east and west. And so really looking to the north and what we could do. And as soon as that parking garage came down in March, April of 21, I just looked at our orientation to the city. We just became a different thing. We used to sort of block, I would say, the east to the north side of downtown. It was hard to navigate around the building with what we had around here. And especially with what the city has planned on Market Street and that east side and some of the gold building development and all the other things that are being announced, we really now sort of, that plaza connects the east side of downtown all the way through to Lucas Oil Stadium. We saw it for the first time on Colts opening day on Sunday. We had a lot of foot traffic through there. People, park all over town and tailgate and walk to the stadium. And that's the first time we were open for business that they had a game. And it was really fun to see how people are using it and how we're just open up. We see Eva Core from the building now. We have a great view of her, which we all find really inspirational. So it's nice to see as people discover it, stumble across it for the first time and discover it.
Is this a bit of a tipping point? I mean, I can point back on the 40 years or so I've been in Indianapolis at several momentous times that for downtown Indianapolis, things that help to continue to change the vibe and add to the vibrancy and those types of things. But as you look at what's happening at the Fieldhouse, and then I think there's something like $2 billion worth of projects either underway or on the drawing board in downtown Indianapolis. Do you sense this is maybe another one of those times for downtown Indianapolis to take that next big leap?
I certainly feel that way. And I will tell you, I was with Jim Morris recently, our vice chairman, many people know, and who's got, I think, a long picture into the past of how we got to where we are today. And I've heard him say several times recently, he thinks the next 5 years of our history are going to be some of the most exciting in terms of changing what we look like and what we're able to do as a city. And so to hear him say that is pretty impactful.
Certainly one of the things that helped change Indianapolis, certainly in a positive way, the 2012 Super Bowl. Doesn't seem like it's been over a decade, but you were very instrumental in the leadership of the local organizing committee in really putting on one of the most well-run Super Bowls ever here in Indianapolis. What was that experience like as you reflect back on it?
It was a great experience in so many ways. I had moved back to Indianapolis, to Indiana, my home state, after being gone for almost 20 years to work on it. And to just be able to reconnect immediately with so many of the key leaders in town at the corporate and the nonprofit level, because everyone was all in on making that a success. So it was nice to immediately reconnect. And then just, there are so many things that happened that made that successful, from the weather to the people, of people in our community, the volunteers and everyone who pitched in. I've worked on 6 Republican national conventions in other cities in America, and no one does it even close to the way everybody here comes together to make these things work so well. And I think you can make your own luck to some degree. And so God helped us with the weather, but most of that was just simple hard work and collaboration and everybody rowing in the right direction and wanting it to be successful. And when I see people from the NFL, they will to a person still say that was the best Super Bowl they've ever worked or been to, which is great, because it has been a long time.
What is it about Indianapolis? I know you probably get asked this a lot, that makes things happen like that. So we not only host the Super Bowl, but we do it in a way that is, people stand up and take notice, do things like Super Bowl Village, which hadn't been done before. And there's always something that makes it special. What is it?
I think we care about it a lot more. I mean, we don't rest on our laurels. We're always working on the next bid, whether that's for Big Ten football or basketball or Olympic swimming, or thinking of the next. That's a great example. Putting a swimming pool in a football stadium. Not many people have thought to do that, but we did and pitched it. And I had nothing to do with that, in full disclosure. But I'm really proud that they thought of it, and we want to be helpful where we can. And so, I think in a lot of cities. We were talking about this morning, actually, when we were walking down to meet with the NBA folks, the fact that when we are doing something in the city and IMS always comes in, and the Colts and the Pacers and the Indians, and everybody wants to do the right thing because it's helpful it's additive to us. And when I've been to some of these other cities for sporting events, and I'm not going to name any cities, but if it's a city that also has an NFL team and also has maybe motorsports or something else, when it's the NBA All-Star Game, you don't see anything from those other entities. And that won't be the case when you are in Indianapolis. We certainly have the Colts are donors, as we were to the host committee, and IMS has been as a donor and is incredibly helpful. I mean, Indy cars are part of what we're known for. We don't run away from that. And I just think there's everybody is just frankly in it for the right reason. And part of that is we don't have the ocean and we don't have the mountains and those things. So we've got to be better than everybody else, but it's also because we take pride in being better than everybody else. And some cities dial it in, and we just don't do that.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think, and this is just Mel Raines' opinion, do you think Indy will go after another Super Bowl?
Gosh, I mean, I think we probably will. I think the NFL would be receptive to that. Lucas Oil Stadium is a fantastic venue, and the Colts are a model franchise, and so
and people should know it's not an easy thing even to just bid. I mean, it's a big commitment to just bid on one, right?
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking. I think that what people don't understand is you have to thread a lot of needles for the right year, and that's both. What we have, Leonard Hoops and his team has done a great job of booking conventions out many years in advance. So we don't always have the hotel rooms or the space. And that's not a bad thing. It's because we're busy. So you've got to thread what we can do, along with new stadiums coming online in the NFL. There's a new stadium being built in Nashville and one in Buffalo, and all these things coming online. Just like our new stadium was rewarded with a Super Bowl, those new stadiums get rewarded. And then you want to be in warm weather and cold weather. And you put all those things together, and there's not 5 times a decade that we could host it. And so I certainly think we will again. I hope we do again. I hope I get to be part of it if we do. And that's my personal opinion.
Yep. Well, you mentioned political conventions. So it was, as I was doing some prep work here, was it not long after Super Bowl in 2012, you were leading efforts at the GOP convention. Was that in Tampa?
It was, yeah. I was standing in a hurricane in Tampa.
Wow. What was that
Talk
like?
about going from a great event to a really hard event. That was 2012. Yeah.
Yeah. Politics, a big part of Mel Raines' resume. We'll talk about that and a lot more with this South Bend, Indiana native when the Business and Beyond podcast returns. Stay with us.
At PNC Bank, we're committed to making a difference in the lives of our customers and communities by helping them move forward financially. As a Main Street bank, we try to do right by our customers with every encounter. Our local teams offer personalized financial advice to help guide you in making the best decision. We're proud to be part of your community. PNC Bank. See how we can make a difference for you at pnc.com. Copyright 2022, the PNC Financial Services Group, Inc., all rights reserved.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week, Mel Raines, the President and Chief Operating Officer of Pacer Sports and Entertainment. And Mel, we talked a lot about some of the really big projects that you have been involved with sports-wise in your career. Politics, a big part of your resume as well. But to go back even further, you are a native Hoosier, right? Grew up in South Bend. What was growing up in South Bend like for Mel Raines?
It was cold, Gary. It was very cold.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
I remember the blizzard of 78 well. We were home for a week. It was a great place to grow up. I feel like I grew up in a small college town in a lot of ways with Notre Dame there. And I'm a big fan of the university, even though I did not go there and went to IU Bloomington. It was a great small town to grow up in. My parents are both from there. My sister still lives there, so I go back often. It's the perfect distance. I live close to downtown. I live on the Near East Side here, so no one's showing up for dinner unexpectedly, but you can go up there if you need to for a day or a quick overnight, which is also nice.
Right. What really occupied your time? Was it sports, academics, arts? What'd you like to do?
Yeah. In high school, I would say I was not the most academically focused person at Mishawaka Marion High School, but I played every sport you could imagine, from softball and tennis and, of course, basketball to soccer, and would have loved to have played soccer in college, actually. But when I was starting college, that wasn't a varsity sport. So I played club at IU for a couple of years, but I was pre that being something you could play. And I worked at Notre Dame in high school. At Corby Hall is where the priests and the monks lived. And so myself and some of my friends served them dinner, family style. It was a great job. It was like 5 to 7:30. They fed you dinner. It was a good wage. It was easy work, and you could still make your sports practices and get your homework done. It was kind of the perfect job. So I don't know that we even locked our front door, on our block. Yeah. It was one of those kind of existences.
So as you mentioned, you went to IU. Did you think about going anywhere else? Was it always going to be IU, or did you think about Notre Dame or some other places?
I didn't really think about Notre Dame. I don't know that Notre Dame would have wanted me, to be honest, with my grades, but I did think about Tulane because my aunt, my dad's sister, lived in New Orleans. We used to go there quite often to visit, and I thought, well, that would be an interesting place to go to college. I did what probably a lot of 17-year-olds did at the time, which is look at the long application for Tulane and the postcard for IU. And I filled out the postcard. My older sister was there. I would visit her sometimes. I thought it was really fun. And that's where I ended up going. I did not give it too much thought, though, to be honest.
What did you study? What did you major in at IU?
Well, I started out studying in the business, thinking I would be getting a business degree, maybe accounting, but I switched my major to telecommunications when I found out you had to take a public speaking course. And I was terrified of public speaking, which is incredibly ironic with what I have gone on to do. So I changed my major and I was a telecom advertising major, and I've never worked a day in that in my life. And I've never taken a political science course. So don't tell anyone I've worked for in politics that.
Well, politics is such a big part of your background, but it's something that you kind of fell into, right?
It truly is. Yeah. I studied in London between junior and senior year. I got back to IU and I just wanted to be in a bigger city. I applied to a IU DC program. I was not in the SPIA school, but they accepted me and I just love DC. So I interned at the National Association of Broadcasters, but my roommate was interning on Capitol Hill, and I applied to Senator Dan Coats' office to be an intern after I graduated for the summer and see if I could find a job. And I loved it and wound up getting hired there by, I think it was August of after I graduated, and started out answering the phones and giving Capitol tours.
And Dan Coates had to be a great guy to work for. He
Yeah.
To me, one of the most genuine people I've ever met in my life.
He really is. And he's just a statesman at a time when we need, I feel like, more statesmen in Washington, and incredibly patient with, a young staff. When you're a senator on Capitol Hill, your staff tends to be on the young side, and you think you know everything, but you most certainly do not. So I'm grateful. I worked there almost 5 years, and it was a great place to cut your teeth in DC, caring people, not sharp elbows. I found that later in my career, but I'm really glad I started out there.
And among your duties, I think at that time, you answered phones during the Clarence Thomas Supreme Court confirmation hearings, right? Which must have been quite an education in and of itself.
It was, and nobody really expected what was going to happen. I remember it was October of 1991, I believe, and we went in, and the phone system for the Senate kept going down. So it was obviously happening quickly. There was no email at the time, so you would have to write a letter to Capitol Hill, and someone would have to open it and count it. And so people weren't taking the time to do that. People were calling. A lot of the things people would call about would be fairly straightforward. Don't raise my taxes. Here's my name and address. And it wasn't emotional. This was very emotional. This was people who, women who had had terrible situations in the workplace, and men who felt they had been wrongly accused. And it was hundreds of calls, and the phones never stopped ringing. And I was out there, I don't know, after 5 or 6 days of this, and I just started crying at my desk, which was rare in my career. And our chief of staff happened to walk in, and he said, "Get up for a minute and just do a couple laps," and answered the phones. And he was just like, "I'm so sorry." I mean, but it's your job. What are you going to do? You got to do your job. But I remember Senator Coates came out and took a couple calls himself and wanted to know what people were saying. And yeah, it was really quite a way to cut your teeth in a new job.
Yeah. After some time in public service, you went into the private sector, right? And lived in New York for a while. What was that experience like?
I did. I worked for Philip Morris companies in New York and DC. Unfortunately, I lived there on September 11th, 2001. So that was a tough time, obviously, to be living in New York, but also a time where you felt like you could contribute and give back and try to be helpful in as much as you could. I ran the New York City Marathon that year, and that was just, to this day, something that brings, great pride that the city turned out the way they did that year for those of us who ran. All of that was great. And no one ever asked me about my time working for Philip Morris, but it was really what taught me to be the professional that I am. Political jobs don't really take a lot of time to invest in their people, and Philip Morris did. I was a hypo. I had great training in management and leadership and interviewing skills and how to write a business plan and all these other amazing things. I don't know that I appreciated at the time, but then in other jobs, I've fallen back on those skills so many times. I really do appreciate it now.
What was, and we just celebrated another anniversary of 9/11. So you were there. What was your experience like around 9/11?
I lived in Manhattan, and I worked by Grand Central Station. So that day we went in like a normal day. I was on my way to a meeting when the first plane hit, and we sort of stopped in a conference room to see what was going on, and standing there when the second plane hit and realized immediately what was happening. I'm standing in a tall building in Manhattan, and planes are flying into tall buildings in Manhattan. So that's not a great place to be. They sheltered us in place, which was the protocol at the time, until the afternoon. And I walked home with a couple colleagues who lived in Long Island and couldn't get home. So they stayed with me overnight. And I remember walking home with them and just seeing people caked in dust. The people that you see now on the documentaries were walking around and just still in shock 6 hours later. And just that whole week was surreal. You were home, you didn't have cell phones like you do today. Our landlines went down in Manhattan. People don't know that. So no one could call. I had like 100 voicemails when it finally went back up, and all you heard were F-14s or 18s or whatever flying over and nothing else. And it was just you felt like you were in a really bad movie, but you weren't. It was it was your existence. But also is why when I got the call about going to the White House 5 years later, I left a really great job and opportunity to support, an administration that I thought was doing the right thing.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. You got the call from the George W. Bush administration to be assistant to Vice President Dick Cheney for political affairs. I know I read a little bit. What was the interviewing process like? Because it was showing up at the West Wing, right? And it was maybe a little intimidating.
You're pretty well vetted by the time you get there, but I do remember walking in for the final interview. I'd interviewed with his chief of staff and his head of administration, and they knew about, they had sort of figured out who they wanted. I think I don't know that they interviewed a lot of people. And so in my last chat with them, they said, if you're offered the job, would you take it? And so we talked that through, and I said, they're not going to put anyone in front of him who's not going to do that. And I said, yes, I would take it. So you walk into the door where the Marine Guard is standing outside, and you walk in, and there was a woman there. It could be a woman or a man, but her title is Receptionist of the United States, so ROTUS. So you get greeted by ROTUS, and you sit there, and I just remember thinking, how did a girl from South Bend, Indiana, wind up sitting on this sofa today? And then we had a pretty brief chat. Senator Coates' chief of staff, when I worked for him, was Dick Cheney's best friend from high school. Oh. So it was a pretty easy conversation. I think they called me about the job because Dave had recommended me strongly. I think what he told me, he said to the vice president was, she would be great at the job, but you'll never get her to take it. So I think it became a bit of a challenge for them. And so we talked about Dave, and he talked about his expectations. And one of his expectations was, we are here to support President Bush and his priorities, and you need to be in lockstep with your counterpart on his side. And we aren't running for anything else here besides the good of the administration, which is a little different from normal president-vice president relationships. And, so I took that to heart. He was very clear about what my marching orders were. And I found him to be a great boss and very easy to work for. And he loved my topic. He was a political guy at heart. He loved to talk polling, the races that year. And we traveled, I think I did 120 trips with him. And
wow.
It just in like 9 months. I mean, he was willing to go raise money and try to help whoever he could that cycle. And it was a great experience. But man, were the hours long.
Oh, yeah, I'll bet. Give people an idea of the grind that job was.
I mean, you just know most people last 2 years because it is a grind. And I think that's about right. You need fresh people in there who are ready to tackle big challenges. But I didn't know what rush hour in DC was then, because I was in well before rush hour. I would walk into 7 or 8 newspapers on my desk. I had 5 TVs in my office. So you were constantly tracking the news. And then, there were briefing meetings all day, starting with Karl Rove and going to president's political director, and so you're keeping up on kind of all the moving parts. There's constant press, working with our communications director, and you just felt like you were, just on a treadmill all day. And then if you weren't traveling, and then home, sort of late at night is when you could kind of catch up on your work a little bit again. But everyone who's there is, became your best friends, and you were all in it together. There's certainly a team mentality, like most of the jobs I've had. And I have an appreciation. I didn't understand it before I went there, but anybody who's doing that, and I don't care what party you're with, they're doing really hard work at not a lot of money. And they're doing it because they think they're doing the right thing for the country and generally in it for the right reasons. I certainly felt that way about President Obama's administration and his staff. I'll probably skip an administration, but I certainly think that about the Biden administration and those folks too. I know they are truly doing what they think is the right thing to do, as we were. And there's no roadmap and there's no safety net. It's tough work.
Yeah. Politics and sports would seem to be miles apart, but is there a common theme between your roles in politics and sports that you see?
Yeah, I mean, it's really similar. It's more similar than you think. When you work for Dan Coates, or I also worked for Susan Brooks when she was in Congress, and Dick Cheney, you're really working for them and their families. And as a matter of fact, I met with Susan's husband before I was offered the job. I mean, they knew how much I would be interacting with the family, and she wanted him to be comfortable with me as well, which I thought was smart. And I work for this Herb Simon and Steve Simon and the Simon family now, Rachel and Sarah and all of the family. And so it's a small family business. We're certainly an NBA team, but this is a small family business that's incredibly invested in our community and our state. And that to me feels very much like the public service in some ways. It's a business, certainly, but we don't always look at things like a normal business would. We often look at things like somebody in public service would, about doing, whether that's opening the doors for an officer's funeral, moving whatever we may have had booked and making sure that we can accommodate that and pay for all the bills of that without asking questions. We do that on a regular basis because it's the right thing to do.
So the next, however many months it is to the All-Star game, I know you've got a lot on your plate. What's the next 6 months or so going to be like for Mel Raines, All-Star wise, and maybe other projects you have on the agenda?
So it's 156 days from today, because we talked about that this morning. And our season tips off in a little over a month. So I'm not going to be making a lot of personal plans, I think, in the evenings. I have a Pilates date every Saturday morning. I try to keep that so I keep sane. But this is really every season when you sort of dig in and know you've got 41 home games. And the good news for us is I think we're going to have a record concert year. So we're incredibly busy on the event side as well. And we're hosting March Madness first and second rounds after the All-Star game. So
that's great.
I've run 5 marathons, and this is where you 1 mile at a time. So sometimes it's one day, 1 week at a time. You just sort of dig in to get through it. And my friends are pretty good about sometimes food deliveries or other things when I need help. But this is just work time. You just got to put your head down and get it done.
And Mel Raines has been getting it done for some time now, and that's been great news for Indianapolis and Indiana as well. Mel Raines, the president, chief operating officer of Pacer Sports and Entertainment. Mel, thanks so much. It's been a great chatting with you, getting caught up with you, learning a little bit more about you and all the great things you do.
Well, thanks, Gary, for all you do for our community too, and to spread the good word about what a great state we are to do business in.
All right. Mel Raines, president and COO of Pacer Sports and Entertainment. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Business and Beyond podcast, presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.